Justin Sharp is the current president of ARMA, the Association of Human Resource Management of Austin Human Resource Management Association, I think is how it is. And that is the professional association for HR people. He is also a recent hire, relatively recent hire, at AMD as a compensation specialist. And he's going to be talking about salary negotiation, compensation packages, all sorts of things that companies do to try to help you be happy. Justin Sharp.
A little bit of additional background about myself. Prior to joining AMD, I was a compensation consultant, so we would go into various companies and build compensation structures and help them bring in individuals or help them restructure their new hire packages, things of that nature. So I have a lot of various experience in compensation. One other point that Kathy mentioned, I'm also the president of ARMA. One thing that we do to help individuals who are currently seeking a job is we actually have a membership type called the Member in Transition. So you can come, you can join our organization for $20 for the entire year. What that $20 gets you is get you free professional development sessions in the morning and in the afternoon. At our normal monthly meeting, we have 2 concurrent sessions in the morning. Then we'll have 2 concurrent sessions running in the afternoon. Basically, if you come to both of them, you can typically go to 4 separate sessions all for free. Those are on resume coaching, interviews, other areas of HR that are all inclusive, but you can get those for free if you just the $20 membership for the entire year. We also offer different social events such as networking nights and happy hours, things of that nature that are at I think it's $10 for a member to come to our happy hour, and at the 2 happy hours we've had previously this year, we had 130 attendees at 1 and we had 115 at 2. And I know I have personally connected at least 3 potential job seekers with potential employees at those events. So it is great ground for recruiting, great ground for networking. Just keep that in mind as you guys are moving forward.
Let me ask you a quick question about that. The membership is available to anybody, or is it just people that are in the HR world?
In terms of your career, you should have a focus towards HR. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I need to go into HR. Now, there's a lot of people, or I know one of the job seekers mentioned that they want to be somewhat of a support person. And so, business relations, things of that nature. So we would accept that. If you can tie your current job to some sort of minuscule HR function, you're more than welcome to come and be a member. Our approval process, we don't ask what you were previously. We don't ask what you're seeking, nothing along those lines. We want your name, we want your phone number, your address, certifications. It's very general information. We don't ask anything about, we don't require anything about employer or what field you want to work in or anything along those lines. So we pretty much accept anybody.
Okay, and people that are management to where they have been on interview panels and they have hired people and done that, would those people be?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody's a little bit HR.
Yeah, as long, even if you want to go into, you talked about interviews. So if I'm a manager who's interviewed somebody, my interviewing skills, that counts as HR. I mean, you could really tie pretty much any job to some form of HR function. So yes, we will. If you want to apply or you want to come talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to give you more information on that. Transitioning to AMD, it was touched on that some of you may not have been hired because you didn't have maybe one thing that was in the job description, or there was one thing they wanted that you may not have had. I tell you, at AMD, our philosophy is we want someone who's willing to work, someone who's willing to learn that. And when I was hired, they hired me to do compensation. One of the pieces that was unbeknownst to me going into the interview was they actually needed help with stock administration and equity. Flat out in the interview, I told them I had 0 experience with stock. Never touched it. Don't even know how to trade a stock on the stock market. Okay, great, you're hired. So don't let that concern you. There are employers out there that just because you don't necessarily meet the exact qualifications on the job description, we will still look at you for employment. And I'll go over kind of how I interviewed here in a moment once I get to it, but it's all about how you present yourself, how confident you are in yourself in the interview. You may not necessarily have to know the ins and outs of every single little detail in that job description, but if you can present yourself confidently in that interview, that puts off a whole different spin. Even if you don't know what you're talking about, but you can say it confidently, then there you go. You're set. You're good to go. So my hope with this presentation today, as Kathy mentioned, we're going to touch on some negotiation aspects, but I also wanted to give you a little bit of insight in terms of from the other side, from the employer. When we are looking at compensation, what are we looking at to determine compensation? And then we're going to kind of turn that from a job seeker standpoint. How should you determine what the compensation is on a job that you may have been offered? Is that fair and reasonable? And how to merge those two into effective negotiations so that you can basically get what you want out of a job. You can get the salary that you want. You can get the total compensation and the total package that you want when you're going into negotiations for a position. So there we are, kind of brief outline of everything we're going to talk about. But the first question I want to ask you guys, and to get your knowledge, is what is compensation? What constitutes as compensation?
Pay, benefits, vacation time, sick leave, the whole package.
Exactly. There's two types of compensations, monetary and non-monetary compensation. So, of course, you can talk about dollars, US dollars, Canadian dollars, rupees, pounds, euros, pesos, all types of different currencies. But that translates all into your money-based compensation, which constitutes under your monetary compensation. So your actual vacation pay, your sick pay, bonuses, equity if you were granted any stocks for the company. That all constitutes as monetary compensation. Then you go into the total package, which is your non-monetary compensation. So when you take your base pay, your non-monetary compensation typically constitutes of 20 to 60% of what your base pay is. That includes your insurance policies, that includes your retirement plans, the amount of vacation you were given, the amount of sick days that you were given, company discounts, flex schedules, telecommuting, coffee on site, whatever it may be. There's tons of different things that can constitute as non-monetary compensation. Keep that in mind as you begin to negotiate your total package, because these can be included in your job offer. It's not just about how much you get paid, it's about what perks you get as being a part of that group. And for those of you taking notes, I'm more than happy to share this presentation, so don't feel like you have to write every little bitty thing down or things like that. I'm happy to share this presentation with you. So where does that get you? You have all these different types of compensation, but where do you go from there? Well, before you really start talking about the package, you have to figure out how to determine what is fair and what is reasonable. What does that look like from the employer standpoint, and what does that look like from the employee standpoint? Because those are two very different things. What's fair for one is not fair for the other necessarily. So how do we determine that? Well, let's go into how I would determine it first, from the employer side. There's a lot of very specific details that I look at. If someone comes to me, they hand me a job description. There's a few details on that job description that I can determine, okay, this is going to be a little bit higher paying, this is going to be a little bit lower paying. However, before you even look at the job description, there's a few other things you can look at to determine what's a better pay than some of the other positions. First one is industry. It was mentioned multiple times that here in Austin, the tech industry is very competitive. You have Intel, you have Apple, you have Google, you have AMD, you have an infinite amount of technology companies here in Austin that we have to compete for that talent. Versus if you look at some other things like nonprofits or the government industry, they may not pay as competitively as some of these individuals. Now, they may offer other things that might be non-monetary compensation to make up for that, but it may not give you as much base pay to start with. So keep that in mind as you are searching for jobs. Next thing to look at is the market where this position functions. So for myself, I function out of Austin. I don't travel very much. I don't have to go to California or overseas to do interviews. I can do it over the phone if I need to. So when we start talking about the scope where I'm looking at to study this, I'm looking at just the Austin market. I don't have to look at a U.S. market or a Texas market, anything along those lines. Now, if you're a sales position and you might be traveling, you might have different responsibilities such as Austin, Houston, San Antonio, or maybe South United States, whatever it may be. When you're looking at a compensation survey, such as PayScale, such as Economics Research Institute or ERI, Connexa, Salary.com, All of these things, make you put in a scope of where you want to look. So keep that in mind when you're trying to determine your compensation. When you're looking at a job description, does it say this position is out of Austin? How much travel does this position require? Because the more travel or the larger geographical area that you have to cover, that's more compensation. Competitiveness in the local market. I mentioned there's tons of tech companies here in Austin, so we're going to have to be more competitive when we're trying to recruit talent. Flat out. We're going to have to pay more here in Austin versus if we were in Dallas in a tech company to keep that talent here. Because there's so many competitors here in Austin, we have to remain competitive with those companies. Scope of the position. What are your responsibilities? Will you be managing people? Will you be doing analysis? Will you be answering phones? All taken into account when you were looking at compensation. How many years of experience does the position require? More experience, more money. Education, does it require a master's degree? Does it require a bachelor's degree? Just high school education. Different certifications. I know there's many engineers or program management professionals. What certifications does that require you to have? Company compensation philosophy. This is what I'm going to touch on a little bit more in detail here. So for AMD, we subscribe to the Radford Technology Survey. Now that's it. We can drill that down here to Austin, Texas, US, or global. Our philosophy says that based off of that survey, which the participants in that survey are the Intels, your Apples, your Googles, your eBay, all the tech companies, we are going to pay at the median. So we're going to pay basically the 50th percentile for what that survey says. Now, if you are an engineer, we have to be more competitive just because of those companies here in Austin. So we pay our engineers at the 67th percentile of the market. So we are what's called a market leader in terms of that. Because we want to attract the individuals who are going to advance us to the next level, who are going to come in and build that product and develop that product for us that advance us to the next level. And that's going to vary depending on where you are. A lot of nonprofits have a very different compensation philosophy. Like I mentioned, they can't pay the 67th percentile for positions. So they might say, we can only pay you at the 40th percentile of the market. And that's just based off of their budgets. So pay close attention to compensation philosophies. A lot of times it's published on a website, or you can ask for it in an interview. It's typically not something that companies are trying to hide from. Company need. Do I need to hire this position tomorrow? Or is it something I can wait 3 months and see who comes along? Because if I need to hire it immediately, it's going to be much higher pay. So if you're looking at a job and you see that this posting is only open for a week, that means they need somebody pretty quick. And they're typically going to pay you a little bit better to try and get you in there as quickly as possible. The budget. Every year, AMD has a specific budget for new hires that we lay out. Then once that budget starts to run out, we may not hire as much. We are going to still pay you very competitively when we do hire, but the restrictions on opening new jobs is going to be a little bit smaller. We may not have as many postings as we might have, just because we want to make sure we stay within our budget guidelines so that, bottom line is not impacted based on how many people we hire. Internal competitiveness. If you are a recent college graduate or someone who has limited experience into that field, it's hard for me to justify paying you more than someone who's been there for 10 years and has been doing the day-to-day job. So we have to look at what the current incumbents in that position are making and benchmark it off of that. Last thing, I know when Kathy and I touched on it in the phone call prior to this, is the salary history. What have you been making previously? So the question was posed is, should I include my salary history in the job application if I have that option, or should I disclose that in the job interview? The answer to it's maybe. And the reason that I say that is because it's how comfortable are you disclosing that? From my point of view, I am going to base your offer not necessarily off your salary history, but I'm going to take that into account when I'm determining everything. And I'll give you just an example of what I mean. If someone is making $100,000, my salary survey says I should pay you $80,000, I'm going to have to look at what else I can do to make up that $20,000 gap. I have to make it, and I have to entice you to come work for us for $20,000 less a year. So how do I do that? On the flip side of that, I'll give you a prime example. At my previous employer, I had pretty much the same position I had now, except I also had a sales piece to it. So my base compensation was lower, and I got 10% of any contract I brought into the company. So on the application for AMD, it only asked for my base salary. So I had to put $40,000 for a position that normally pays significantly more. And so there's always the question as well when they develop that offer, are they going to lowball me? Because they saw me that I was making $40,000. This position normally makes 150% or 2 times that amount. So you have to be able to approach that in a fashion that does not offend someone. So if you go into an interview and they say, hey, I noticed you didn't put your salary on your application, what are your salary expectations for this job? For me, the answer is, I want your best offer. I didn't put that on there because I want you to submit what your best offer is to me. I don't want my previous salary taking into account what type of offer you're going to be giving me. You want to make sure if you decide not to put that on there, that you are very friendly about it. It's not an adversarial position. It's nothing along those lines. Make sure that you're just saying, hey, I want your best offer. Whatever that is, keep my previous life out of it. Make sense? All right. So now you have all this information. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just to clarify, a lot of applications now, especially online, anything with an asterisk has to be put in. And I noticed that on the salary requirements, there's asterisk.
Yep.
So it won't even let you go 3 without putting it in.
So put 0. I mean, you don't have to give the answer. You can say, okay, I make 0. And then they say, well, I saw that you make 0 in your current job. Can you tell me how you make 0? How are you still employed there? And so you don't have to put your current salary on that. You can say, well, I put 0 because I wanted your best offer for what this job pays. When I'm looking at that on the backside, I say, well, they put 0 there. That doesn't necessarily make 100% sense. But in an interview, you can sit there, you can tell them why that is. Now, will that impact you when you talk about getting interviews? Maybe, maybe not. But generally, on the application, it gives you an area where you can provide additional information. Explain why you put 0 in there so that we can see that.
Yeah, I had a question. You gave an example where you made a base salary of sales component. And a lot of companies, and I've had sales jobs like that too, where you have that split, but the company that I work for, they had the estimated salary that should make
Sure.
be comfortable with everything like that. What would be different if you put that salary versus the base salary? Why would you put one totally in there? How would that impact interview process?
So let me just make sure I understand your question first. When you're applying for a job, it's asking you, or it's stating what the salary range is they're going to pay you. And then so on your job application, it asks you what do you expect to make for this position. You put somewhere in that range. Is it?
No, so what you said was, yeah, what was your previous salary?
Right.
So you gave an example of $40,000.
Sure.
But you have 10% of the discussion.
Sure.
A lot of sales companies will sit there and say, okay, this is your rate, this is $40,000. But if you meet all the goals, you're going to have to do $80,000 a year.
Right.
Why would you put 40 say that? I mean, you can improve $40,000.
Because based off of whatever you do, you're going to get $40,000, no matter what your end performance is. So that's your base. The rest of it is variable compensation. So based on how you do, how you perform throughout the year, you may or you may not get that money. And so there's no 100% guarantee that money is going to come to you. But on a year-to-year basis, 100% you're going to get that $40,000. That's your base. So the rest of it is based off of how you perform against your different metrics throughout the year that you may hit, you may not hit, things of that nature. And so you can't necessarily, that's not a guaranteed salary every single year. Variable compensation is something, if the company's not doing well, your variable comp's going to go down, but your base pay is going to stay the exact same.
I guess the question I'm asking is, you're before a new hire, you obviously before your best foot, and it is if you put down the income, not pay the income, not last year, but technically you're paid before you put the commission, with that.
I think it's really how it's approached in the interview. Or if you have that comment section on the application, explain how your salary was broken out. It's not going to hurt you necessarily that, this is my last 3 years salary average. That's not going to hurt you necessarily. You just want to explain a little bit further in detail. But I didn't want to put $40,000 because it's so much lower than what this job really pays, but it was 10% based off of the salary or 10% based off sales. So just kind of explain it if you have that option. It's not going to hurt you if you put that in there. So Now, I want to jump into how you should determine your pay. What does that look like from the job seeker standpoint? The first thing I'm going to say is do not use free surveys. You can go to Glassdoor, it'll show you the compensation. You can go to PayScale, you can run the report in there, it'll tell you why. If it's at all possible, do not use free surveys. And I'm going to give you an example why. I went to PayScale, I put in all my data, everything I could possibly do for my current position. So I put in where I work, my scope, how many employees in the company, every last possible detail I could, and it came out, my annual estimated salary should be about $68,000. Okay, fair enough, good deal. The funny thing about PayScale is they provide you with another thing that says, well, these are your possible careers that you could expect to go into from here. These are the next steps in that job level. Anybody see anything funny on that? Right here.
It's less.
You get a promotion and you make $3,000 less than that position that was there. That doesn't even equate. That doesn't make sense. So, okay, we got our survey. We got our $68,000. That's what we use. I took that and I ran it against my Radford survey that I use on a day-to-day basis. Same position, same scope, same responsibilities, pays $91,000. That's $23,000 difference in the free survey versus the paid survey. So if at all costs, do your best not to use free surveys. Yeah, you can benchmark it off the Glassdoor, you can benchmark it off the PayScale, but the reason you don't want to use the free surveys is because typically when that data is included in there, it's put in by users and it's not verified by the organization on the back end. So if I want to go in there and say I make $150,000 for an entry-level position, they're going to accept it. And they're going to include that in their average for the next user that comes along and tries to apply for that same position, or looks at that same position. And vice versa. If I only put $30,000 when I really make 60, or if I put 40 when my total compensation is 90, it's going to skew those results. And there's no way for you to really go in and dive in to tell exactly who makes what. Now on Glassdoor, you can review the company reviews and user-by-user data, things of that nature, to get you somewhat of an idea, but it's still a very slippery slope to include that free data in your analysis. If at all costs, or if possible, pay for salary surveys. You can go to one of these websites, you can say, hey, I'm looking at this position, I've received an offer, I want to make sure it's fair. And they'll typically run a report for you. Granted, it will cost you some money to do that, anywhere from $100 to I've had it cost $400. You can also contact compensation consultants. I know at the previous firm that I worked for, we would generally charge about $200 to perform just an ad hoc assessment, but we would include 3 of these different survey sources. And so you're getting 3 survey sources as opposed to 1. So you can go to these sites, you can have them run these reports for you based off of the scope of the job, where it's located, what industry it's in, and they can provide you with a paid, fully verified data report, which will give you another bullet as you go into your interview or your negotiation process to get more money out of it. Because this is a paid, verified data. Also, when you are making sure, when you're doing this, make sure you utilize the correct scope. Like I said, right job responsibilities, not the job title. You want to look at the actual responsibilities of the position. So, you have that information. How do you determine your fair pay? What is AMD's process? What do we look at? What are our guidelines? When a hiring manager is hiring a position, what can they do? First, let's look at the hiring process, and then we can get into all of the power that the hiring managers have. Easy. Open a requisition, select your candidates, select your final candidates, nothing normal, or nothing out of the normal. Next, we go into what the actual hiring manager does. So they're going to look at your salary range, your minimum, your target, and your maximum value. Let's just say, for the sake of example here, our target compensation for this position is $100,000. That's their starting point. $100,000 is where they go. Typically, your range is plus or minus a little bit, so we'll say $75,000 for our minimum and $140,000 for our maximum. That's our range of what we can pay. Next, they're going to look at the candidate's current position. Are you employed? Are you not employed? Are you underemployed? Do you have stocks from a previous company that we would have to buy out? Would you require a signing bonus? Would you require a relocation? And we're going to take all that information and put it into an offer letter. Once that Once we put all that information, we're going to send it out to the employee. Now you can sign it, or you can begin to negotiate. But there's a lot of factors that we are going to take into consideration on our side prior to even starting that negotiation process and prior to sending that to you. So, when we have all that information, we start looking at the actual offer. There's two different guidelines that we have to go by when we are making an offer. There's a below director level, and then there's a director and above level, or guidelines for each. And so I'm going to touch on kind of what both of those are here so that you can see if you were to apply for A&D and get to this point, this is the steps that we would have to go through to determine your salary. First, we're going to base everything, as we mentioned, off of what the market is, the scope of your position, your base pay. We're also going to base it off your comp ratio. So if we say, okay, $100,000 is your 100% comp ratio. That's your target. That's where you want to be. We're going to adjust that based off of your experience in the field and your educational experience and your certifications. We're also going to go by the paid guidelines, which I'll touch on here in a minute. Then we're also going to look at your peers. We're hiring you into a specific position. What do your peers in that position make? Because again, we can't pay you more than someone who's been in the position for 10 years if your experience does not justify that. So we're going to take all that into consideration, then we'll send you that job offer. Next thing, sign-on bonuses. Typically for A&D, they're a little bit more unique, and they have to kind of be justified, if you will. It's not just something that we can offer, oh, I know you, $1,000 bonus. I know you, $4,000 bonus. We have to actually justify that process. Same thing, if we are looking at you and you are currently working for a publicly traded company and you have some form of stock options or different equity, we will buy that out. We will buy out your equity or your loss opportunity, so to speak. So if you leave that company and you're going to lose 1,000 shares, we will buy that out. We'll give you A&D shares in return. Offers that go outside of specific guidelines do have to go through compensation approval. And I'm going to touch on those guidelines here in a second. Now for director levels and above, we look at same information, same scope, who's this person going to be managing, things of that nature. But they're more complicated, if you will. Typically with directors, you start talking about stock options, you talk about sign-on bonuses, you talk about retention bonuses, things of that nature. So it's a little bit more specialized, and there's a much smaller talent pool. So anytime we open a director level and above position, that comes straight to the compensation team. We are the ones who develop that, not the hiring manager. So that way we can make sure that whatever that director situation is currently, we can offer them a very competitive offer compared to their current situation. So it's a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more unique when we're talking about directors. It's not set guidelines necessarily. Does that make sense? All right. So I mentioned our guidelines. Remember, our comp ratio, right here, this is $100,000. This is for someone who is fully contributing. So if we are bringing you in, you've been doing this position for Intel or some other tech company here in Austin for 4 or 5 years at this point, we will bring you in as close to market as we can based off of our peers, based off of the peer analysis. If all of your peers are around 100% comp ratio or making about $100,000, we're going to bring you in at something comparable to that. If you are a new hire or have limited experience in the field, we're going to target you over here. It's called not fully contributing. It's going to take a year or two to train you in that position. You may not know every last little detail. For example, I don't know stocks. I have no idea what to do about stocks up until about 3 months ago. So that's what's called the not fully contributing. That doesn't mean we don't want you. That just means we know it's going to take some time to develop you, and we're going to bring you in at a salary that is reflective of that. On the backside over here, you have those individuals who may have been doing this for 10 or 15 years at this point, but they want to stay in that engineering position, that design position. So we have the ability, and the hiring manager has the ability, to bring you in at up to 120% of market. So that means your target salary is $100,000. They can go all the way up to $119,000 without requiring anybody else's approval. They can give you another $20,000 basically without requiring approval from anyone. That's the kind of power that they have based off of their position. They don't have to get the approval that the rest of us do. So these are specific guidelines. I know it's a little bit of a weird chart to look at here, but if you're a level 4, so you're up here, right there, have 1 to 2 years experience, we're going to bring you in at 95 to 105% of the market. So a $100,000 position would pay anywhere from $95,000 to $105,000 based off the peer analysis. You can follow that same thought process all the way down. If you get to that level 9, which is a manager basically, high-level manager about to be a director, it requires a minimum of 12 years of experience to even get to that level. This is kind of the same thing, but broken out a little bit more differently. We have the professional, we have over here, we have management, and then we have the non-exempt. So depending on the type of job that you are applying for, these are the different levels that you can get. Here's level 1 through 5, 6 through 9, and then kind of a combination. Again, once you get to level 6, you're a manager position. And so that's an exempt position that's typically going to pay a little bit more. Typically, somewhere in the job that we offer or we post on the website, it will include what level you are at. But the common thing you will see is based on your experience, you're going to have a 90 to 95%, 95 to 105%, or 100 greater than 105% comp ratio based off of where you are currently.
So when you talk about managers and stuff, what about senior individual contributors? Where do you rank those?
It depends on how senior we're talking about, but here's our individual contributor list right here. Staff individual contributor, staff 1, staff 2. This is our individual contributor list right here. It's the same comp ratio, but based off of these levels right here, your base starting point is higher. And so, this position up here might pay $60,000. This position down here is going to pay $120,000, somewhere in there. But this is just the percentile of that pay based off your experience of where we're going to bring you in. So, as I mentioned, we can go all the way up to 120% comp ratio just at will. We don't have to have prior approval from anyone. The hiring manager doesn't have to send that to me to get approval. They can just pay up to 120% as long as it's justified. And down here on the bottom again, you guys can't really see it, but for org levels 10 and above, they have to send that to us. That's the directors and above where we have to put together that unique offer based off of your situation to make sure it's the most competitive offer that we can do. So, how do you take all that information and then go into the salary and negotiation process? And what do we expect during that negotiation process? It truly is a two-way street. Little push, little pull, little give, little take. It's a two-way process. Now, the question is, what does that two-way process look like? Again, I mentioned on how powerful your hiring manager was. They can pay you up to 120th percentile without approval. They can offer a sign-on bonus. They can offer equity. They can offer relocation. They can offer these non-monetary rewards if they want to go that route. They can grant different perquisites for different positions. So they can give you a company phone, a company car, a company credit card, based off of your position and your business need. They can do all of that without approval. So when you start talking about the salary negotiation process, make sure you are looking at the total package, not just the salary portion, because there's a lot of additional quality of life improvements that hiring manager can offer you based off of that position. Make sure you're taking all of that into account. What do they expect from you? Negotiation. We expect when we make an offer that you are going to send us back a counteroffer. So don't be afraid to send that offer to us. Forgive me for not citing my source, but as I was doing some preparation for this presentation here, I found a study that said 100% of employers surveyed thought that it was reasonable to negotiate. 90% of those built that into their offer already. And so they expect you to come back with a counter offer. It's not going to offend anyone if you say, hey, I think this really should be up at this amount. They should be 100,000 versus 90,000, somewhere in there. The key point to that is make sure you have your backup data to support it. Make sure you can justify it. Don't just say, I really think you should pay me $20,000 more. That's not going to get you anywhere. Timely response. Sure, we expect you, take 3 days to think about it. It's a big decision to make if you're changing employers or if you want to work for that company. It's a big decision to make. Take your time to think about it. At the same time, don't take a week, 2 weeks, and then expect that offer to still be on the table. If we say, okay, take 2 days to think about it, we'll reach back out to you in 2 days, see where we're at. If we don't get a response from you, 3 days goes by, 4 days goes by, we're going to move on. Because we are assuming you are not interested in that offer at that point. So timely response. And then just professional courtesy. Like I said, the salary negotiations are not meant to be adversarial. Don't come in, if we offer somewhere that you think is lower than where it should be, Don't say, hey, you guys are screwing me. This should really be $30,000 more. Okay, have a nice life. Come in and say, I appreciate your offer. Thank you guys very much for your time. But, can we talk about the salary a little bit? I think this should be a little bit higher. So what do we need to do to get there? It's not an adversarial position at all. It's like I said, give and take a little bit on both sides. That employer wants you. They've extended an offer to you. They want you there. They think you have the qualifications already. Let's not, mess that up at all. So have that professional courtesy of just be kind and courteous during the negotiation process. So the question is,
If you don't know what the options are, especially in terms of non-monetary compensation, is that an open question to put that in their court and say, hey, what are the things we do? Or
Absolutely.
is there a way of finding out what
absolutely. So what I would do is say, I appreciate your offer of $100,000. It's very generous. I greatly appreciate that. Are there any different non-monetary rewards that might be extended with this position also? And they'll kind of outline, well, this is what we have available. What were you thinking? Now, you could just go straight in and say, I would appreciate if we offered that the organization pay for all my association memberships while I'm an employee. Or I would appreciate a company's cell phone so that I didn't have to put confidential information on my phone. Things of that nature. You can just ask for that and they'll tell you if they don't do it. I mean, if there's something specific that you were thinking that should be included in that offer, ask for it. All they're going to do is tell you, sorry, we don't offer that, or sorry, we can't do that based off of your level, or things of that nature. So if you don't know what it is, I'm sure you can research it. Glassdoor is great in terms of going and seeing employees' view of the organization. And sometimes it'll tell you about some of those non-monetary rewards that they can offer. So do your research and just fire back. Don't be afraid to ask. So how do you get more? Know the market. Know where you are supposed to be paid based off of your current location, based off of the scope of the position, and make sure to utilize those salary surveys that are notable. As I mentioned, try and avoid the free surveys at all costs. Just because in my personal experience, those are not quite as reputable data.
Just curious how long those take.
The salary surveys?
You get an offer, can you get a Radford answer back in a day?
You should be able to. In my experience, when individuals would come to me in my consulting life, it would take us typically about an hour on our end to compile that. Now, how does that look in terms of the workday? We could probably typically get it by the end of the workday. As long as it gives us a few hours lead time, we can do that very quickly. In terms of Radford or some of these other guys that are much larger, they have people that are pretty much specifically designated to run these one-off reports. Every now and then, we would not have sufficient survey data for a position that we were trying to find. So we would contact them and say, this is what we need, can you send it to us? And they would get it to us within 2 hours, somewhere in there. So it's a pretty efficient turnaround time when you do that. But, yes ma'am.
Would publicly traded organizations such as yours,
Mhm.
are they mandated to have the non-monetary possibilities somewhere that an individual could research?
We are not mandated to publish that anywhere, no. Now, when you talk about like government companies or some nonprofits, sometimes they are. But in terms of publicly traded companies, the main thing that we have to have visible is a lot in terms of the finances, in terms of bottom line, profit loss, where all of our shares are going, how much we're paying our top officers, things of that nature. Our compensation philosophy is public. If you go and read some of our grant information that's online, that's available. But what we offer in terms of non-monetary rewards is not necessarily available. And so, as I mentioned, back to the original question, just ask for it if you don't know. So benchmark the job, know the position. When you go into an interview, know the company. Know every last detail you can about the company. When I went into my interview for AMD, I literally did research for half a day. I spent 4 or 5 hours researching that company. Compensation philosophy, who they are, what their mission, their vision, their values are. What are their key initiatives? How are they trying to achieve those key initiatives? What's their stock price? What their finances have looked like for the past 4 years? A great example of that is during my interviews with AMD, I was kind of able to turn the table a little bit. Because when you start looking at the finances of AMD, the past few years have not been very kind. I will give you that. And so from a perspective, employee, that's a little bit nervous going into a company that, well, their annual revenue, yeah, we made $4 billion in 2014, but we lost $500 million based on our expenses. So pose that question. Okay, I see, I looked in your finances, you guys just lost $500 million last year. Why do I want to come work for a company that's hemorrhaging money? That's, I don't want to do math right off the top of my head for that, but that's a very significant amount of money versus your income that you just lost. So you're able to turn the table and ask those questions and make them sell the company to you as opposed to you having to sell yourself to the company. Very different spin if you go in there extraordinarily prepared. Sell yourself. When it comes to negotiations, hey, I've got my master's degree. I got a bachelor's degree in this. I have this certification. I've been doing this job for 5-10 years already. Pay me more is essentially what you're saying there. I know exactly. I could come in and I can be a fully contributing member immediately. You don't have to worry about trying to learn the position, and you have to convince them of that. Is basically what it comes down. You have to convince them of why you are worth more money. Negotiate the package, not just the salary. So those non-monetary rewards, those equity grants. We have, the hiring managers do have in their authority to grant you 1,000 shares of stock without getting approval. Our current stock price is, what was it yesterday? $450, $460 yesterday is where it closed at. That's almost $5,000 in stocks that they are able to give you without having to get approval. Now, does that happen for everyone, depending on the position? No, it doesn't happen. They can give the sign-on bonuses. All of that. Don't forget there's other things besides the base salary that can be included in that offer. And the last thing, ask for it. Don't be afraid to ask. Like I mentioned, 90% of companies expect you and have built into their offer that you are going to ask money. Ask for that more money or ask for that negotiation process. So make sure you are prepared to go into negotiations and don't be afraid to ask for it. So, what can limit negotiations? And primarily when I'm talking this is from the employer standpoint. Biggest things, the industry. How competitive is that industry in your local market? Basically, the tech company here in Austin, there's tons of employees or employers here that are potential employers for all of us. So, you can say, well, I know Intel pays this much, or this is for my research, this is what Intel's information is, and they're offering more money than you. How can we basically compare those two? And again, that's referring to some of that Glassdoor information. Maybe they're offering different non-monetary rewards that you're able to find out there. Make sure that you can include that. But from our standpoint, that can be a limiting factor. Depending on what industry you're in, nonprofits not able to pay as much. They're not able to negotiate as much. In government, those are typically pretty set in stone salaries. So those different industries are going to play an impact on how much you can negotiate. The company's compensation philosophy. Based off of what they have stated in their philosophy, that's what they are committed to. If they said that we're going to pay at 50th percentile of the market, then that's kind of what they're holding themselves to. Yeah, they have a little bit of flexibility on it, but they're not going to go up, if they're paying you $100,000, they're not going to go up to $150,000 just because you're able to justify it. That's not equitable to them. Budget constraints, both within the company and within the department. Specific departments at AMD have their new hire budget. This is the amount that they have allocated for new hires on a yearly basis. Same thing on the high end. We have, on a company basis, we have a big budget on how much we're allowed to allocate for the company. So if their budget is kind of spent, they're not going to be able to come back and say, yeah, we have money to spend, let's give them more money. It's going to limit us as to how much we can negotiate. Competitors in the market. As I mentioned here in Austin, there's a larger tech field that gives you a larger room, basically more places you could go work if they don't accept your offer, gives you more room to negotiate. Versus if you're looking for a tech company in the middle of Nebraska where there's no other tech companies, then it doesn't give you as much room to negotiate because they're the primary employer of tech employees in the area. So there's your less room to negotiate with that. And business needs. Do I need to hire this position tomorrow, or do I need to hire it 3 to 4 months from now? That gives me time on the employer to negotiate someone who I think has the qualifications and someone else that I think would be a good fit that I may not necessarily have to pay $100,000. You know, I could maybe get someone for $95,000 or $90,000, somewhere in that ballpark. So, long story short, make sure you ask for the entire package. Negotiate for that entire package is the best thing that I can say. Don't just focus in on that base salary, because there's lots of quality of life improvements, lots of additional bonuses out there that companies can give you without even having to go get approval for it. The hiring manager, you just have to justify it to one person. That's it. And they can give you more money or better package or just better quality of life.
I'm just curious, for anybody, I had a friend who just had an offer, and everybody expects to negotiate. So he came back and started to negotiate, and they said, well, we already built that in. Your offer salary was the best we could do.
There you go.
And then he came back and said, well, I built up vacation over the years, how about no, everybody gets 2 weeks on the way in the door. Basically, they just said, have a nice life, take it, live. I was very surprised. Is that common? Or
So what that tells me is that's a company I don't want to work for. It's basically what that says, because if the company's not willing to negotiate, not willing to come off that line at all, then odds are once you get in there, it's going to be very not employee friendly, so to speak. Your quality of life, if they're not willing to give you an extra couple days of vacation or things of that nature, that's something that's not going to impact the bottom line at all, because it's already kind of included in your pay a little bit. It's just a day or two off. They're not going to be very flexible. And so that just tells me that's somewhere I probably don't want to work. And as I mentioned, 90% of companies basically have already said that, yeah, we're going to negotiate a little bit. I know there's one question back here real quick. So there it was.
I was just gonna say, was that a state job?
Sounds like.
That's actually.
At that point, could you say, well, what are some non-monetary perks that you might be able
Right.
to offer me?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said,
And
negotiate
just
the
open
entire
it up.
package. Yeah, there's always another question you can ask. If they just say no to specific ones, go back saying, okay, well, what else do you offer that we can negotiate into this to make up for those lost days of vacation, that lost compensation, that lost quality of life that I'm currently losing? And a lot of that also goes into what is his current position. Is he currently employed somewhere and they're trying to lure him out of there? Is he seeking employment and they know that, so they're going to stand firm, thinking that he'll take it? It all kind of ties together, but don't be afraid to ask the questions.
Do you have any different advice for entry-level, temp, freelance, anything that doesn't have like a high degree of leverage? You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. In terms of how to get
Negotiations,
more,
yeah.
It really comes down to what have you been doing while you're freelancing. How have you been improving yourself? What certifications have you been trying to achieve that are working towards your professional goals? Another piece is how active have you been in the community? What volunteering have you been doing to give back to that industry? Make sure you're building that complete resume. I know if on my resume I have my professional experience, but down at the bottom I have a whole list of all of my volunteer roles. So as president of the ARMA board, vice president for membership on the ARMA board, president or membership committee member in San Antonio for another association, a whole list of different things that I've volunteered for just over the years to help build that resume. So while you may not have the professional experience, you've shown that you're willing to work for it, and that while they may not be able to pay you the full 100% of the market based off your professional experience, they're going to acknowledge that you're a hardworking individual who's willing to willing to do what it takes to achieve those final goals. So make sure you're doing something in the meantime to continue to improve yourself that may not necessarily be directly professional experience. Any other questions?
The negotiation for salary, is that more of an email tool or a verbal conversation?
To me, it kind of depends on how they offer. For A&B, they called me and said, hey, we're going to be sending you this offer in your email. Keep on the lookout for it. And so that kind of tells me they want to communicate by email, so it was more of an email communication. Now, if you're a smaller company, maybe here in Austin, a lot of people want to do that face-to-face job offer or over-the-phone job offer. Then you go that route because that's their preferred method of communication. I would say however that offer is extended to you, that's how you're going to want to negotiate because that's the method of communication that they prefer. So it makes them a little more comfortable in the negotiation process. There was a question back here somewhere.
Yeah, so let's say it's verbal negotiation. I mean, should you expect, and something that the hiring manager has the latitude to grant, should you expect to get everything in writing? Like if they said,
Yes.
yeah, you can have, an extra 2 weeks than the standard or some
Yeah, there's-
vacation or something like that.
There's a saying in HR that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen.
Right.
So write it down. And I can tell you, in my time with A&D, we have 9,500 employees roughly. 2 of the individuals that we have hired have it written in their contract that they are going to be receiving some form of stocks or equity based off of their compensation package. Even though it's even in their contract, the hiring manager didn't process it. And so me, as the individual who handles the stocks, I had no idea that had been promised to someone, so they didn't receive their stocks until 2 months after they were hired. So even if it's written down, follow through on it. But 100% yes, get it in writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
What happens if, I had a situation where I went for, a recruiter actually contacted me to talk to another company. And then, so I went and I interviewed, but then, first off, it was confusing trying to figure out who I was supposed to be following up with. But then it was finally the recruiter who came back to me, so an outside recruitment company, came back to me with the offer. So I'm not talking with the hiring manager on the offer. How do you navigate that?
Let me relate that to AMD. The way that we do it is the hiring manager says they want to post a position. Okay, we do it. They look at the candidates, select the candidates, and they send those to the recruiter. The recruiter schedules interviews based off of the hiring manager's schedules. Then it's actually the hiring manager that actually comes in and does the interview and conducts the interview. I know for AMD it was actually a panel, so I interviewed with 5 different people throughout the course of a 2-hour period. And then they'll go back and they'll make the selections. Then they'll get to the coordinator or the recruiter who will actually extend the offer. If you go back and start negotiating, you'll go back to the recruiter. The recruiter is going to go back to the hiring manager. It's a middleman. Is basically how it works. They're just relaying communications from one to the other, so that to kind of ensure that there's no adversarial positions when you start working. They're basically taking that out of the equation. Is kind of how they look at it. So while you may have limited contact with the hiring manager, and the recruiter is the one that sends you the offer, make sure you go through the recruiter, because that's their preferred method of communication, is to go through the recruiter. Is how it's supposed to work in their mind. To answer your question? Any other questions?
In the initial interview, a lot of times they'll ask you what kind of salary are you looking for. How do you then negotiate that at the end, or are you pretty much stuck?
Well, and that goes back to what do you want to provide? Do you want to say how much what you're willing to, accept, or do you want to say, well, I want your best offer? Provide me with your best offer, so that once I get that offer, I can compare it to where the market is to see if that's fair. The other piece, if you do say, okay, 100,000 seems like a fair salary, let me just say that. You don't know where they stand on it. And so the option is always there to flip that. Say, well, I've done some preliminary research. I don't know exactly what this position pays, so what are you expecting it to pay? I want to make sure that it's a fair offer for me. And what is your compensation philosophy? What do you guys normally say? How competitive are you? What is your expected salary for this position? Because, I'm kind of, in the wind in terms of what the company does. So, you can always flip that question back on them. Or, well, typically, when you're talking to the recruiter,
Yeah, because they'll say what salary range are you looking for.
with the recruiter, I would say, well, I really want your best offer. In terms of how fair this position is paid or what the pay is, I've applied for a lot of jobs, and so, I have a rough idea of what it might make, but I'm not 100% sure, so I just want your best offer, is what I would say.
In those jobs where they say send resume with salary requirements, and that unless you put that figure in, you will not be considered. If you put in a figure that's kind of a middle figure, even though you feel you're worth more because you want to go through the process, and they make you an offer based on what you initially said, is it appropriate to come back and say, thank you so much, I'm very excited about it, the salary seems a little bit low based on what I now know about the job. You know, initially you didn't mention all these additional responsibilities, so I feel that what I gave you initially is no longer valid, and I think that a more appropriate salary would be in this area. Is that possible?
Yeah, and that's absolutely possible. It really depends on how the interview process goes. Like for me, in the job description, there was nothing mentioned about stocks whatsoever. Now that's probably 50% of my job. And so you could take, well, you mentioned this in the job description, or in the interview, this wasn't in the job description, taking that into account, you know, this is the new salary that I'm requesting. Or just say, you know, previously I didn't fully have a grasp of everything that the job duties contained. Based off of the new information that I've done a few different preliminary salary studies, and this is where I think the market should be. The whole thing is with the whole salary process, make sure you have your information and your support on your end, regardless of where that comes from. Make sure you have your support to go forward with your negotiation process. What's up?
Yeah, I had, you're talking about opening up with a negotiated value for yourself to them as a salary. Is it appropriate to say, I was looking at whatever number, that say $75,000 as a entry point for an overall compensation package?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're opening the door for that further negotiation? If they say, yeah, here's $75,000, but what else do you want?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the way I would say it, I wouldn't say that $75,000 is your starting point for your total compensation package. I would say more along the lines that $75,000 is kind of your starting point for your base pay. Because when you look at your total compensation package, your total comp package should be 20 to 60,000 or 60% more than what that base pay is. And so if the base pay you're expecting is $70,000, but you say my total compensation package, I want it $75,000, that that kind of limits you in terms of the package. So I would stick to just saying this is the base pay that I was expecting as a starting point for negotiations, and see where they go. But if you're going to go that route, you're going to have to go higher, because they're going to come in underneath your amount, the amount that you want for base pay. And then you could say something to the effect of, okay, I want $75,000 as my base pay, and then I'm curious as to what additional non-monetary compensation you might be able to offer. But in terms of the total compensation package, I would say make sure you're sticking to the base pay and then asking for what additional non-monetary compensation, because unless you have very specific, detailed reports of the total compensation package, it's really hard to determine what that company is going to be offering on non-monetary compensation. So, does that answer the question? They can. I mean, it depends. They can call your previous employers and try and verify that way. The previous employers don't have to disclose that, but it's kind of up to what your previous employers do want to disclose to the new employer. I know it's funny, when I was applying for jobs or seeking different employment, I applied for a lot of various places. And so about a month and a half after I started with A&D, I got a call from a few of my references and previous employers saying, hey, someone called me, wanting to do some reference checks and previous employment checks. I was very confused by that because I'd already been employed for almost 2 months at that point. And so I don't know who it was, but they can call and they can ask previous employers if they want to disclose that, but a lot of times the previous employers won't want to, because that will give insight as to what that company it does to recruit and retain their talent. So they can ask for it, but a lot of times they won't get it.